No, not too much light. It's good.
So I'm the only one with the tie.
You're the fancy one. You mind?
No, I set mine over here because I couldn't reach. This is our
Like your
wrap question, in case you're curious.
Okay.
like your socks.
Oh, thank you.
Like that, huh?
My God,
Atlantic
I'm so
sailfish, not bad.
See, I couldn't find any fun socks
should have done that.
for my daughters. She has all the fun fish socks.
Need to get a fish.
I can't see a thing with my glasses.
a
It's just like a
whale.
big glare. Yeah.
This is
Spitting out the water, right? I have those too.
stick it together, huh?
The mics are.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead and start. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. I think folks are still starting to file in, but we are going to get started here. And please come in, find a seat, make yourself at home. We have an exciting panel for you today. And if you were just here for the last session, they gave us a great tee-off to start talking about aquaculture and the importance of aquaculture and what that means for the United States, for our economy, for our growth, for our blue economy. What does that mean for our local communities? And how can we grow aquaculture within the United States? And is it an achievable goal? Is it something that we can do here in the US to create jobs, to help with food security issues? And are there attainable ways to do this? And with the group that we have assembled for you today, I think they're going to be able to answer all of those questions and certainly a lot more. Because what we have done is we have brought research from an operational standpoint, from an investor standpoint. We have the folks on the panel who can walk you through what it means to start growing a fish, to the research that goes into growing those fish, to investing in those operations, which are so key. You have to have the money if you want to be able to grow those fish. So my name is TJ Tate. I'll be your moderator today. We look forward to having a lot of questions from you guys. And I'm gonna let the panel introduce themselves. So Omar.
Good afternoon. It's very nice to be here. My name is Omar Alfi. I'm the co-CEO of Pacifico Aquaculture. We're an offshore aquaculture business based in Ensenada, Baja California. I've had the honor and privilege of working in sustainable aquaculture for 5 years now. I was previously working in the finance industry in private equity and investment banking, and I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you, Omar. And Daniel?
Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. And my name is Daniel Benetti. I am a professor and director of aquaculture at the University of Miami. I've been working with advancing technology of both hatchery and primarily offshore aquaculture over the last 30 years, working on just about every topic, from the purest science all the way to market and marketing.
And Max?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Max Holtzman. We're a couple of different hats. My main hat is as a principal with Pontos Aqua Advisory, which is part of the Pontos ecosystem, which in part is an investment company that focuses on aquaculture and the seafood value chain more broadly. It's a $1.5 billion fund partnered with a group in New York called Tinicum Fund. And that part of our company makes big bets in seafood and aquaculture, typically 35 million to upwards of 150, 200 million, sometimes larger than that as well. The second part of that is Pontos Aqua Advisory, which focuses on, where I'm a principal, which focuses on earlier stage company. It's a de-risking platform for turnarounds, startups, and other early stage companies, primarily in the aquaculture space. And we are also have one division that is called institutional de-risking, where we partner with ENGOs and governments to help them with issues. And just a brief example, and that I'll go into a bit, is, for example, we just worked recently with the WWF on a big project talking about sustainability in the global seafood shrimp industry. And then lastly, I'm an officer in a group that was formed at the end of last December called Stronger America Through Seafood, which focuses on increasing sustainably healthy seafood production here in the United States, and looking at all the different ways that we can do that, from inshore, RAS, offshore, all the different groups, but really focus on the sustainable ways to do that.
Max, I think you just summed up the entire panel. Thank you very much.
I'll leave now.
So, as I mentioned, my name is TJ Tate, and I've been in the seafood industry for about 20 years now. I actually started in aquaculture way back when I didn't know what it was, then went into wild fisheries, and now I've come full circle back into the aquaculture discussion because it is so timely. For today, I really posed 3 questions to the guys that we wanted to get to the heart of. And they're pretty simple, but they really tie into the key issues that we have at hand today. So if you think about what can be done in the aquaculture space, what should be done in the aquaculture space, and what are the impediments? So what are the problems? What are we facing? And those can be lumped and phased off in a lot of different rabbit holes, but I'm gonna keep them on target so that we don't get into those rabbit holes. But I really wanna start at the beginning, which is the operational side. So what can be done? And Omar, you are a key example of that. You have an operating fish farm, as you said, down in Mexico off of Ensenada. So tell us a little bit about that, how you got to be there, and what does it take to run a fish farm?
Sure, thank you very much, TJ. As I was saying, my name is Omar Alfi, and I'm the co-CEO of Pacifico Aquaculture. This is our farm site. We're based in Ensenada, which is about an hour south of San Diego, on Todos Santos Island, 8 miles offshore. The company was established in 2010. Myself and my partner joined and became involved in 2013. Here, I really want to give you kind of as a case study of what an aquaculture company looks like, a responsible production, and how and our journey has led to this company. So my partner and I, Dan, as you can see up there, we were college roommates. We lived together at USC way back when. We were trained in finance, previously investment banking, private equity, going down that path. And then we both went to business school. And we decided, we didn't really want to do that anymore. We wanted to try and do something good for the world. Didn't know anything about aquaculture, about seafood. But we knew populations were expanding, the world needed more food. And so we reached out to our networks thinking, let's try and find an interesting investment that maybe we can do together through our friends and family. And actually through the Hub's SeaWorld Research Institute based in San Diego, we came across Pacifico Aquaculture. Literally, we had never seen a fish farm. We went down during spring break of our second semester in business school, and we fell in love. We fell in love with the industry, with the company. We saw, as I'm sure many of you know, that as we were studying more and more of this industry, that the world is eating more seafood. Populations are expanding. But wild supplies are stagnant. Since the 1980s, we haven't been able to get more seafood out of the oceans. Of course, we can sustainably fish, but as poorer nations become wealthier and increase their consumption of protein, and as wealthy nations become healthier, we're going to be eating more seafood, as everyone knows. And so we realized very early on, very high level, wow, aquaculture is the only way to fill that gap. And aquaculture needs to be done well. This is maybe our opportunity to contribute to that small problem, or to that huge problem in our small way. So we saw that this was an amazing investment. Pacifico had been around for 3 years at the time, but their previous investors had financial problems, and so they'd left this company without any financing. The company was located an hour south of the border. As many of you probably know, the US imports over 90% of their seafood. So the fact that for logistical purposes, we might as well have been in California. It takes us an hour to get to San Diego and 3 hours to get to LA by car. We were very excited about it. We thought it was a great opportunity. And so we started gathering a fund of our friends and family to invest in aquaculture.
Omar, were you not scared to jump into an area that was pretty much unknown to you, coming from a finance background?
You know, I think being naive is sometimes an asset for an entrepreneur. We really saw that it was doing good for the world. It was doing good for a community in Baja that has had a history of fishing, but the fishing industry has decreased there. It was an opportunity to produce a healthy product and help save the ocean and potentially make money for our friends and family at the same time. So we said, you know, at the time we were both 29, we said, this is worth it. We can jump in head first, pun intended. Little did we know what we'd taken on. So maybe getting into why we thought this was a good idea. As I mentioned, Pacifico is based at Todos Santos Island. Really, it's a perfect site for offshore aquaculture. And we had an inkling of that at the time as we studied more and more what aquaculture looks like and what good aquaculture looks like. The farm is located 8 miles offshore on the protected side of an island. So we have very strong oceanic currents. We're far away from coastal contaminants and beaches and tourist areas. We have very deep waters there. There's at least 20 to 30 meters between the cages. And right in front of our cages, actually, the ocean floor drops down to 250 meters. So there's a submarine canyon right in front of our cages. So it creates very strong suction. It's a beautiful environment to grow fish without damaging the ecosystem there. In fact, Todos Santos Island is a nature preserve, and it's protected by the Mexican government. And we work hand in hand with them to make sure that nobody's going on the island, that the area around the island is protected. And we're almost considered, we work with them almost as the stewards of the island and operators at the farm. The species we were growing at the time, and still growing, was a fantastic species. We grow striped bass, which probably here in DC you know as rockfish, potentially. It's a lovely species, very tasty, but had never been grown in an ocean environment, even though that's their natural habitat. So we thought that's a very interesting opportunity from the market side. As I mentioned, located about an hour south of the border, so close to key markets, a low carbon footprint, and a lower logistical cost.
And that wasn't what had been grown previously at this site?
They were growing striped bass and another species, white
Okay.
sea bass at the time. And in Mexico, there's an existing and well-defined permitting process for offshore aquaculture. So that helped us feel secure that, okay, there's a future here in this business and in investing for the long term. Keep in mind, we were doing this with friends and family money at the time, thinking, okay, this will cost a little bit, but the operation grew and grew. Really, how have we succeeded up to this point? We've expanded now from 30 employees up to 165 employees. I would say, really, our team is the key to our success. The reason that we've been able to grow, and we're now selling in amazing restaurants and retail that I'll tell you about on the next slide. Through our employees, through our team, we were able to build the world's first ever intensive striped bass hatchery. So we went to Europe, to Greece, to Scotland, to areas around the world looking for the best in the world at best-in-class aquaculture. And we brought them over to Baja to educate our employees and to transfer that knowledge to make sure that we're constantly elevating the capabilities of our team. So really, we've been focusing on learning, focusing on improving our capabilities, our knowledge, going into this with a humble mindset, recognizing and knowing that really there's a lot that we don't know, and we have to continue learning as we go. Lastly, a commitment to the community in Baja. We work closely with the government. We work closely with orphanages there and with schools. We're actually the largest employer from the marine biology department at the local university. So through that collaboration, we've gotten strong support from the community and the government, and actually the fishing community, where we employ some people from that industry to work closely and really support our growth as we've continued this business. And really, the part that everyone loves is our product. Another reason that we've succeeded is we have an amazing fish. We really believe in it, and we want to do things the right way. Really, that's why we invested in the business, why we left our careers in finance. And we find that we've been able to prove to ourselves and to the market through certifications, third-party sustainability certifications, that we are doing things the right way. So we are the only 4-star certified product in Mexico from Best Aquaculture Practices. And we also hold the certification from Whole Foods. We've had tremendous reception from our fish, from customers, Michelin star chefs on the West Coast and the East Coast, sushi and white tablecloth restaurants, Whole Foods. We're hoping to launch national Whole Foods sales. We're now in several regions of Whole Foods. In fact, Rick Bayless recently opened a restaurant in Chicago called Leña Brava, and he'd come visit our farm beforehand and loved the farm, loved the fish so much that he made our fish the feature preparation at his new restaurant in Chicago, served in 4 different ways. So really, we were honored to see that. It was a testament to us that, well, we do have a great product, and we're making this progress slowly but surely. And keep in mind, we spent 3 years really learning how to build a hatchery, how to grow the farm, hiring the right team, bringing people from all over the world to come work with us to build this company, because it was a big challenge, a challenge that more than we thought when we first invested.
And a lot of product taste testing.
Yes, definitely product taste testing. Eating fish, eating our striped bass 2 to 3 times a week, and very happy to do it. Yeah. I'd say the focus of our product when we're in the market is transparency, provenance, quality, and consistency. We're able to tell our customer the fish that we're serving and the fish that we're harvesting that day, we know what day that fish was born. We know who its parents were. We know how much feed it received every day of its life. We're keeping track of every fish and the health of that fish throughout its entire life cycle. Provenance, we're extremely proud of our site, of the water quality, the ocean quality, where the fish live. It's a perfect place for the striped bass to live, and it really shows itself in the quality product. The quality and consistency is really delivery and delivery in our operations and delivery in the product to the customers on a consistent basis. And that's really finding and building that excellence, that culture of excellence within the company. Lastly, I thought it'd be useful to discuss a little bit about the challenges faced. I've touched on these a bit, but over these past 5 years, we thought we needed a certain amount of money when we first started out. Little did we know it was actually 4 to 5 times that much money. And so for the first 4 years, we would fundraise. Luckily, we had backgrounds in finance, so we would fundraise, reach out to our networks, invest in the business, build. The first year, we built a hatchery. We'd go back and fundraise, come back, expand the farm site a little bit, hire more people. But every year, we'd have to go back and fundraise. And so that was a very difficult process. We're lucky and very, very blessed to have found a financial partner now who's partnered with us, a private equity fund based out of Los Angeles, recently invested in our company last October. They're called Butterfly Equity. And so we now have secured a financial partner and have secured the future of our project. Very exciting because we can now invest and build our company for the long term. It's a huge stage of growth for us.
And when they came in and invested in your company, would you say that there was one specific aspect that they liked overall? Was it the provenance? Was it the transparency, the quality, or was it the entire package that you had worked since 2010 to build?
I think it was the fact that, there were many, many factors, but really the fact that we'd gotten it to this level and de-risked so many stages of the operation. We'd already proven that we could produce the juveniles. We'd proven that we could grow the fish out to market. We'd proven that we could get it to the market and to the chefs and to the customers at the highest quality. And we'd proven that we could start to do that at scale and build a team who could do it. So now they've joined us to really supercharge that growth and continue the expansion and get us to that next level of scale so that we can continue serving the market and continue expanding across the US within different parts of the industry.
So now we need you to open a farm here in the US.
We would love to.
Okay, we're gonna work on that as we work our way through the panel.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll get a farm started by the end of the panel.
Great.
Dan, I'm gonna jump to you now.
There you go.
And because I want us to be able to have a robust conversation. And I'd like for you to talk a little bit about what should be done, and from an academic standpoint, what is being done. I think Omar laid the groundwork and the baseline of what can happen. What does an operational farm look like? What are some of the challenges that you faced, and yet you're still in growth mode, which is fabulous. So Dan, take us through a different part of that process.
Okay. Yes, this was a wonderful case study to begin with. I'll try to give you an overview, what science and technology has been done to do this right. When we talk about aquaculture, we're talking about the future of seafood production. There is no more argument about it. We're already producing over 50% of all seafood for human consumption, and the evidence on all perspectives is overwhelming. And why offshore? There are a number of reasons. We, in the United States, we have the most advanced technologies anywhere in the world. We're second to none. Yet, we haven't been doing it. There are several reasons for that. When it comes, there are several niches, for example, and I think Max is going to address RAS, recirculating aquaculture systems, a marvelous pieces of technologies. But again, it's more for a niche, because I think it has been determined, it has been widely accepted, that we will need to produce 30 million metric tons of additional seafood to feed the world. There is only one way. We do not have another option. RAS would work, land-based would work, but we're competing with certain resources. Flow-through aquaculture, water is limited, et cetera, et cetera. It has got to be offshore. There is no other way. And to that end, we too are more advanced. There is a big mistake that people think that offshore you have to go 100 miles or 50 miles offshore. No. In this case, his farm, what determines the carrying capacity of the ocean, so our job is to make sure that we do things right. Most of our funding comes from the private sector nowadays. NOAA has been very good in funding as well for the science, but we understand the bottom line. We understand what the companies need and want, and we address those issues. So first of all, we close the cycle of commercially important species to produce in captivity those juveniles that will be grown, so as to not compete with fisheries. And second, it has to be environmentally responsible. And to that end, for the last 15 years, we have been conducting the environmental monitoring of farms, both at the bottom and the water column, and there is no significant or cumulative impact over the years. Why? As they did, is site selection. What really matters, what determines the carrying capacity, which is the capability of producing in a certain area, is the depth and the current. It's more like a derivative that if you have the right depth and the right current, the ocean, the farms become a point source of fertilization rather than the point source of pollution, because we never crossed that threshold. So all indicators, any way you look at it, everything looks to a very bright future for aquaculture, right? The market has been figured out, the investors have agreed that that's the way to go, and the technology is in place, the engineering, the environmental concerns. In my view, again, the big picture, actually, we have to address the environmental concerns, obviously, because that's to start with, and also the legal, the permitting process, which, again, I think Max is going to cover. But the reality, it's not, there should not be any of those concerns. We should get permits because the environmental issues, we have data, we have publications. The concern is to reach economical viability, because without being economically profitable, nothing can possibly be sustainable in the long term. So that is the biggest issue in my opinion. So again, here what we have to discuss in our future is not whether, if, or when we can do. Aquaculture's mainstream is here to stay. What we need to address and resolve together and move on is how and where we're going to do it. It's that simple. And I think we all are pointing for the offshore because it's there. And we, for example, in the United States, we have the largest economic exclusive zone anywhere in the world that we do not use for production. We are, I say we, in aquaculture, we're producing more than beef since 2013, where we produced 66 million metric tons, and beef was producing 63 million metric tons. Beef is still producing that level, and aquaculture is already producing more than 70 million metric tons and continues to grow exponentially. It's not just the technology, it's not just the business. Even the business gurus, such as Peter Drucker, states that that's the new. And clearly, you know, at this point, we talk a lot with the investment groups and venture capitalists and all that. All right, what you're saying, okay, why then offshore? What you're looking at is a good example. Salmon, everybody likes to criticize, but this farm produces 11,000 tons of the year with a very small relative footprint. And it would take, fish are more efficient than any other organisms in converting protein and energy into growth for a number of reasons. But the reality is that for us to produce 11,000 tons of protein, we would need 500, maybe 1,000 hectares of land to do that. So right there is a good example because it's so present to all of us. Modern systems, the technology, again, the engineering is amazing, just likewise RAS, which he will cover. The modern aquaculture system, I mean, they can't keep up with the high energy of the open ocean because you need high energy, again, not to accumulate any pollutants and not to cross that threshold. So you're seeing, again, farms in Norway. I mean, this could be done elsewhere. And this is a very interesting slide for those of you who are not familiar. You are looking, say, at the upper left. This is the farm of the future. I'm going to use Open Blue Sea Farms in Panama as an example. Well, he's in Mexico, Open Blue is in Panama, Martech producing snapper in Costa Rica. There's a lot of companies out there in Mexico as well. This is US technology. This is us, it's our people, trained by us, funded in great part by NOAA. It's our investors, and everything's been done abroad and then shipped back into the United States. It is high time to bring the ship to port. What you're seeing on the left is a 22 submerged cage. You don't see anything. This is in the open ocean, and then you have to bring up the cages for certain services and for cleaning the nets and for harvesting, but this is what you see inside this cage. These fish never see the same water twice. It's, you know, the current and the depth take care of everything. Again, environmental monitoring over the last 15 years and no cumulative or significant.
So Dan, how deep and how deep does that type of a cage need to be and how far offshore?
Good question. Well, it depends again on the site, and his site is close to the coast. In fact, you want to be as close to the coast as you can to facilitate, daily maintenance, and they are next to an island. This one, it's about 10 kilometers, like 7 miles offshore, and at the 60 meters, about 200 feet. So it's kind of, it's in many ways it's challenging to operate on a daily basis, but again, it is working. That if you eat Kobe in the United States, that's what you're getting. This is a harvesting operation. This is what you see. You multiply that by 22. It's, This slide I like to show because what you're looking at here is it's 15 years old. We've been discussing this forever. And we've tried in the Gulf initially, then we went to even Petrobras in Brazil, and then Pemex in Mexico. We draw more attention from them. But if it does happen in the Gulf, first of all, again, it's, interdisciplinary, everything you can possibly imagine, an aquaculture operation like that. But we're talking here about what is known as IMTA, Integrated Multi-Trophic Aquaculture, whereby you also raise macroalgae, which are nutrient strippers, and also maybe mollusks, which are filter feeders. That was the model that we tried to do. But there was one problem. Over time, we were measuring the nutrients being released by the cage, and it turned out that there was nothing there to support that additional production. So we decided to give up. There are a number of reasons. I know the timing is short. We could talk forever about this, but the reality that there are a number of reasons why this could not happen in the Gulf as of yet. I think that's going to be for debate, and I'm looking forward to those questions. I think that's trying to be cute, but she's the one who is actually.
I just got a stack of them here. So Max, based on everything that these two fine gentlemen have just said, talk about the impediments from a financial standpoint. Omar mentioned that, and Dan touched on that. It's not cheap to start a fish farming operation, and that is one of the impediments that we know that we have seen here in the U.S., but it's certainly not the only one. Talk a little bit about where the investment is going, if people are investing in aquaculture, and if they're not, why not? What's scaring off investors?
Sure. And I'll speak about that from the perspective of the difficulties here in the U.S. And I've really been traveling around the country and the world talking about that quite a bit. One part of my background I didn't mention, where I did that mostly, was from early 2009 till the end of 2014. I was the senior advisor to the United States Secretary of Agriculture, also the acting deputy undersecretary, a couple of divisions there for a while. And the one common thread that ran through my time there was going around the world and waving the American flag, talking about all the great things we are doing in aquaculture here in the U.S. It's technology, it's the feed, meaning our soybeans, and the technology around soy as a replacement for fish meal. But as Dan pointed out, the dynamic that I always talked about overturning and turning around rather, is that we take our technology here in the U.S., we take our soybeans here in the U.S., we ship them overseas, and they come back as fish. There's no reason that our producers here aren't outproducing, outgrowing, outmarketing, outselling in the seafood sector as they are in other ways. And one benefit we have at the stage we're at right now, because it's nascent here in the U.S., the offshore aquaculture just doesn't exist, is that we can build it using all of the lessons learned around the world and do this in a way that is sustainable and works well with the environment, and understanding that. And that comes from technologies around data gathering, being able to measure and look and understand what's happening out there. And we know what we can do now. So it's exciting that we have the ability to do that here in the U.S. The difficulty is that we can't get, I talked a bit about my company, so I'm just going to go through these slides. I'm going to stop here for a minute as I'm going to talk about this for a second. But the difficulty here in the U.S. is that we can't get out of our own way. For these operations that you can imagine, it's incredibly expensive to finance these. High capital expenditures on the front end, high operating expenses, and you need really institutional capital to be able to drive this industry forward. And there's no investor that I know of, including myself, that would put dollars into a process where when you put an application for a permit on the front end, you have no idea when it'll come in on the back end or what the environment is to operate around that. And it's just too difficult in any way to, it's not that you know what the risk is and it's too high, it's that you can't even measure risk or assign risk to the equation. So, money goes from capital to markets and back to capital again, and it's just going to choose a different place to go that has that predictability. So one thing we're trying to do to address that here in the U.S., through some legislation that's actually in the Senate right now, and working very closely with all of the different ENGOs and policymakers and others, is to create a predictable system of being able to farm offshore here in the U.S. and in other areas. And with that predictability, it needs to be based on sound science and rulemaking and understanding where we are and where we can go. So that's what Stronger America through Seafood is, and it's a collection of a ton of different groups throughout, not just farmers and growers, because there aren't many here in the U.S., but the entire seafood value chain that right now exists on importing 90% of the seafood we eat here in the United States. And here's just a list of several of the companies and groups that are a part of this right now. So it's a big effort. It's an important effort, and we have to be able to bring predictability back into the system to enable capital to flow and to enable projects, sustainable projects out in our oceans. One more thing I want to mention about aquaculture that I think is often misunderstood. Aquaculture is often viewed by folks the way beef is viewed or poultry is viewed as a single industry growing a single protein. But aquaculture is more like agriculture writ large, in that there are many different methods of production. We've talked a bit about offshore. There's pond aquaculture, raceway, and what I personally think is the most exciting and cutting edge technologically are called RAS systems, recirculating aquaculture systems, that can be entirely land-based, using filtration systems to run water through multiple times, very green operations and systems. A lot of energy use, yes, and that's being worked on now to partner with energy producing facilities and operating there. But really the effort is, you're converting feed into fish, and that's another method of doing that. But aquaculture is much more broad, not only from production methods, but what's being grown. It might be marine finfish, freshwater fish, shellfish. We're working on a project now at Pontos on growing seaweed, in essence, as a carbon sequestration method, and also being able to be harvested commercially as well. So there's a ton of positive benefits, and that can go into what Dr. Benetti described as IMTA, which really combines different production methods around a single area. That's the multi-trophic part of that, and there's really just some exciting cutting-edge things that are going on. And a tremendous amount of opportunity, not just on the production side, but in technologies around feed, around recirculating systems, around cage technology and monitoring. And I mean, it's like building a rocket when you look at some of these projects. And the importance of the work Dr. Benetti's doing, and then what Omar is doing to take that work and actually operationalize it and get better and better and better as it goes along is important. And then what Admiral Gallaudet talked about quite a bit at the last time, I think one of the most important things that folks can do in working on this as well is raising the awareness of farm-raised seafood. And for the industry not to be afraid to acknowledge the problems that existed in the past and the challenges that exist today, and talk about those openly. But to really acknowledge that the benefits of it are incredibly important as we see a world that is going to be close to 9 or 10 billion in the next 30 years, and the seafood protein production, especially in the seafood sector, is going to continue to grow. And as our fisheries are finite resources, as Dr. Benetti mentioned, there is no other path to increasing seafood production other than through responsible and sustainable aquaculture. So that's what we're working on quite a bit. And from an investor's perspective, long-term sustainability and finance, there's an intersection there where there's a tremendous amount of commonality in predictability and control. Investors want predictability and control. Operators want predictability and control. And sustainability demands predictability and control. And it has to do with not overfeeding or using chemicals that you might need to fight a disease or otherwise. That's all based on data, research, science, and understanding your operations.
And so from an investment standpoint, and you hit on a number of these questions, which have, thank you guys, you've all, whether you know it or not, have grouped them into very succinct categories. Most of you are asking the same questions. But from an investment standpoint, is the first real big hurdle the regulatory side? And how do we maneuver around that?
We were talking about that earlier, but yes, because right back to predictability, without the predictability of a regulatory system, that there's really two parts to that. There's the regulatory system to be able to get a permit and understanding how long that process is going to be and what it takes, et cetera. And then operational certainty while you have that permit. What's the regulatory regime around operations? Am I going to be able to operate with certainty? And look, we want this to be enforced and regulated and monitored, and bad actors out, because that's not good for anyone. It's not good for the environment. It's just not good for the industry. It's terrible. So this will be like I said, the lessons learned from the past, something that you can operate. And if you're operating sustainably, you may continue to operate. And operations cannot be canceled or terminated because someone that's elected or otherwise doesn't like aquaculture all of a sudden. that it's based on science and rules, and science-based rulemaking is an incredibly important part of this. But yes, I think that's the first step, because without that, you're not going to go anywhere.
And there are different regulations, whether you're looking at coastal, inshore versus the offshore and RAS systems.
Sure. So offshore, for all intents and purposes, starts in most cases 3 miles out inshore, and that'll be regulated by federal agencies and the federal government. 3 miles in is considered inshore, regulated by the state. But don't think for a second that the states aren't interested in what's happening in the federal waters off their shore. They are. As you move closer to the shore, you start to face NIMBY issues, not in my backyard, other things as well, and combating the bad actors and projects that have existed in the past. So that's that sort of uphill swim. And then there's land-based. We're working with a company right now that is entirely land-based, 3 miles from the ocean, that is growing a marine finfish in a fully recirculated system, drawing salt water from the aquifer deep below them and cleaning the water and injecting water back down cleaner than it was when it came out. Fully land-based, doesn't even need to be in the ocean. So there's a number of different methods of production that I mentioned before, but that's just one example.
You did, and I'm going to touch on that right now because I have a couple of questions that really surround the RAS, recirculating systems. And Dan, I think you can best answer these, and certainly anyone can chime in, but can you explain why ocean finfish farming is needed when land-based aquaculture that reuses water, contains escapes, is becoming more popular, uses less energy, and is less expensive?
Yeah, both would play a role, no doubt about it. The thing with the RAS, again, if you're looking at developing a niche market and make it feasible economically and technologically, RAS, as I said, there is no other way of describing it but a wonderful piece of engineering. It's incredible, really, and it's evolving. However, this is not my quote. I was in Chile last year on a salmon farming meeting, and the representative of the industry, he made that comment. Again, population is growing. We all understand that we need to produce 30 million metric tons. RAS will not do that. In fact, if all RAS that exist in the world are added in terms of production, and even the ones that are being planned, this is not going to make 1 single digit of the total world aquaculture production. So it's not going to resolve the problem of the 30 million metric tons. But yes, indeed, it can absolutely resolve the problem of a company willing to make money and advance technology and produce a fine product to the market. The proximity to the market, for example, here you can do a RAS anywhere, that you reduce the carbon footprint in terms of transportation. You can have live fish delivered to the markets and so forth.
So we need a combination. We need a combination of our well-regulated wild harvest species, yes, and we also need a combination of the different types of aquaculture systems.
Absolutely.
It's not a one-size-fits-all when it comes to feeding our growing population, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I think that the more responsibly sourced seafood there is from different sources, the better we're off as a country and as a species, because aquaculture and fishing do have lower carbon footprints than other forms of protein, and they're healthier for the world and reduce medical costs. And there are countless reasons why RAS and offshore together will continue to make sense to feed the world as we need more and more protein.
And so responsibility is a big issue that always I hear from the consumer side, from the entire supply chain, which I know everybody talks to, and responsibility and sustainability mean different things depending on who you're talking to. One of the biggest questions that everyone always asks is about escapes. So you've shown a lot of different types of technology, and you've shown how we've been working on it for 15 plus years, even longer with some types. Omar, I'll start with you since you have an active fish farm. Mm-hmm. How do you address potential issues should there be an escape? Are there measures that you have in place to ensure, because obviously you want no escapes.
Yes.
That hurts your bottom line as well as everything. So talk about it just a little bit.
Yeah, of course. I mean, escapes, that's the worst thing. We don't want that ever. And so we invest very heavily to make sure that it doesn't happen. We have a team of scuba divers, 15 scuba divers, who are diving each cage every day, making sure that there are no holes even this small, which the fish can't swim through. But any holes they'll repair the day of. So we're checking the nets on a daily basis. We have 2 nets, actually. We have a culture net on the inside and a predator net on the outside to make sure we have no interaction from predators from the outside who can damage the nets or from the fish escape on the inside. At the same time, we're also working very closely with local fishermen. In case there ever is an escape, we do have an escape plan. It's never happened, but it's something that we've developed. We would go and we would contract with local fishermen to go look for the escapes. But it's something where we're vigilant. We're checking these nets on a daily basis.
And you mentioned that you have certifications, so third-party certifications, meaning a best aquaculture practices or an ASC. Is that a part of their audit system? Are they looking at your nets to see that they're in good shape? Are they looking at the number of escapes you might have had?
So the certifications, they're diving the cages and looking at the nets, and they're also looking at our net maintenance schedule and making sure that we're checking the net tension on a regular basis, because we check all of our nets. We have to retire certain nets after a certain period of time once they reach a minimum net tension weight, so that, because that's a weak net and it's a risk. So we have an entire net team, 15 people, who are repairing nets, checking net tensions on a regular basis as well. So it's something that the certifications are very mindful of, and we're very mindful of.
Let me add one thing to that, because that just goes to the risks of farming that we haven't talked about so much. So that's a technological and equipment risk. But farmers face the same risks that our terrestrial farming friends do as well. So he's subject to weather, disease, climate change, anything else that might affect the farmer is something that you have to battle every day. I think from an investor's perspective, what we often see where this difficulty is that it's very easy to tell a great story about aquaculture, but at the end of the day, you need to keep an animal alive for sometimes a year or more.
Longer.
Longer. So it's extremely challenging, expensive, and you probably haven't had a day that's been the same since you've been operating these farms, I would imagine.
No, and that actually goes back to one of the points on my last slide of respecting Mother Nature and learning from her, and really recognizing that there are many factors outside of our control, whether that's water temperature in the ocean, which significantly affects our growth cycle and the health of our fish, or it's the biology and the natural biology of the species. We do have live inventory. So, as investors, we want to grow the business as quickly as possible, but really you can't do that. You have to understand the fish, understand the capabilities of the fish, really take care of their health, be mindful of, happy fish is a happy company. I mean, we have to take care of the fish from every step, from the day they're born, and we're incubating them. We have them in almost like a NICU, an ICU. It's a germ-free environment, all the way to when we harvest the fish and we process them in an extremely food-safe environment. So we're constantly monitoring all of these external risks, and we have to take them into account. So that's another factor that an investor and an operator has to consider, which you can program and you can learn as long as you respect the nature, respect the environment, and go with the scientific approach, working with universities, really understanding the biology. But it's another risk to keep in mind. So when you add a regulatory risk on top of that, it's another hurdle to try and build this type of business.
And if I may, science, the technology is being improving so dramatically. There are recovery strategies, but also just to a point that in the offshore now, to avoid shark breaking into the caves and escapements, they are beginning to use copper netting now. And nobody wants, of course, escapements from occurring, but especially the farmer. And there has been less and less. But in case it does happen, because let us assume that in the big picture, at a certain point, some escapement would happen. And that, again, where science plays a role. Because we need to ensure that the genetic makeup of those fish being raised, they are not inbred, and in case they escape, there wouldn't be any problems with, affecting the genetic makeup of the wild population. In essence, aquaculture, in the end of the day, has to be something that, instead of polluting, has to be seen as fertilizing the ocean. And if, in the case of an escapement, That is a strong statement that some people may have a problem, but it can be seen as industry subsidized stock enhancement.
And let me just, go ahead.
I think that Dr. Benetti made a really important point about not contaminating the environment. In fact, as part of our certification standards, we're checking the ocean floor underneath the cages 2, 3, 4 times a year to make sure that we're not having any impact at all. And that's something that we have as part of the values of the company and also are required for our sustainability standards. So that goes back to site selection, understanding the carrying capacity, which means how much fish you could grow there without damaging the environment. And so the fact that we have strong currents, we have deep water, means that this is a good site for growing fish without damaging the area around it and being able to produce a healthy, responsible product for the market.
And that is a current recurring theme, I should say, through our questions is protection of the environment. But there's also a lot of questions about feed, because as we're talking about producing more fish, growing more fish, are we harvesting more wild fish to feed these fish? There's a lot of technology around that. There's a lot of debate around that. So I think all three of you have some expertise where you could touch on that. Dan, I'll start with you.
Yes, okay. Well, first of all, we haven't been catching more fish, small pelagics from the ocean than it has ever been catched. Over the last 5 decades, the production remains stable in between 15 and 25,000 million metric tons. The issue that what's happening is that aquaculture continues to improve because producers get better and better at it, at using the natural resources. Not just for environmental concern, but in this case, they come hand in hand with the economic concern, because the greatest cost of an aquaculture operation is feeds. And the greatest cost of feeds is the small pelagics, the fish meal and fish oil. So we're getting better and better at that, and the conversion, if you look at it, I don't want to be like an advocate here. I just want to tell you, everything I'm saying, I have to be responsible. I am a professor, it comes back to me. It's science-based, and it can be corroborated with papers and publications and data. We're doing better, and aquaculture, again, fish are more efficient in converting that protein, crude protein, into meat than any other organism by far.
One thing I want to just mention about the environment, I'll go back to feeds, is I think the shellfish farming sector is the greatest example of that, because they're filter feeders, so they're only as healthy as their environment. So talk about a vested interest in a company in keeping the environment clean and ensuring that around them. I forget who told me this, but I love this. It was someone from the shellfish industry that said, we're not environmental activists, we're active environmentalists, because our entire company relies on the health of the surroundings around our product. And I thought that was very telling as to that. And I think now you can translate that, you can hear Omar, how he speaks about his facilities and the importance of that, not because he's regulated, because it's the right thing to do. And at the end of the day, for business reasons, he wants a great product, and those things are essential for that. In the feed space, what a race in technology that's going on right now. It's so exciting. And that's to really find alternatives to fish meal in fish feeds. And you've seen the percentage of fish meal that's a part of fish feeds decline drastically over the last 15 years. Not only is soy a part of it, but insects, other products as well are being used. Well, lots of things are doing with soy fermentation or others, algae, you name it. It's sort of the race to get there. But it's very difficult, because translating what happens in the lab into what works with fish on the farm is at scale is very difficult to do. But we're getting better and better at that. And the amount of technology that's even funded by Silicon Valley type groups out there that understand this is really exciting right now, and it's going to just continue to get better and better. But to Dan's point, that there's an important piece that sometimes aquaculture is a scapegoat for fisheries that might not be managed well. And I think the importance of managing fisheries well and understanding what allowable catches are from those, and then having the market compete for whatever that sustainable amount is key. So aquaculture, I think, is doing its part of the industry by investing hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars into alternative feeds to replace that fish meal, but the industry is growing as well. But that amount of fish meal has gone up and down, but there's been a steady line between that over the last 25 years.
And so we are here on Capitol Hill, and we have heard from NOAA. Where does NOAA fit in with all of this? And are they really working with people such as yourselves, whether it's investing time, money, energy, thinking toward those future plans? How engaged are they in this process? When I was on the wild side, they were extremely engaged through community to permits to the council process. Explain a little bit their role within aquaculture.
I can start with that. NOAA has been an incredible partner for the last 20, 30 years. They have been there. They have funded a lot of students who are now running the industry. And they have been funding environmental monitoring. A lot of that, the private sector, they don't want to do that because you don't do the science. They cannot be funding all that. And NOAA has been very good at that. I take my hat off.
I can't say enough about NOAA's efforts, how positive they've been and important they've been for the industry, along with USDA as well. Those are the two main federal agencies that fund aquaculture research, et cetera, and really make sure that the focus is on research and science and reliable, good data in a number of areas. But the team over there is fantastic. You heard from Admiral Gallaudet, and then there's the career staff that's been there for quite some time that all of you may know, Michael Rubino, Paul Doramus, and the whole team over there. I mean, it's just top-notch group. And when you talk about when you want to talk about good government and dedicated public servants, look to that agency and you'll find it.
I agree. Omar, I think you can speak best to this, and you had a slide with numbers that really showcase this, but how can fish farming help with economic growth and increase jobs?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a very technical business, what we're doing. We're dealing with biology, we're dealing with oceanography, environmental science, technical operations, food science, and food safety. So we have in our company PhDs, veterinarians, master's students, undergrad marine biology students, all who've graduated from local universities or from around the world. We actually have employees from 6 countries around the world who've come to work in sustainable aquaculture with us.
I think a lot of people have a misconception that aquaculture is just like huge agriculture. It's just big corporate fish farms that are taking over the ocean, and that it's going to be automated, and that it's just going to be a feed mill, putting the feed out there and eliminate these jobs.
Oh, no, it's quite the opposite. I mean, you've seen in our company, we've created in 5 years now 130 new jobs. We're 165 employees now and continually expanding. It's an industry that requires strong, skilled labor, and in fact, labor that has potentially worked in other industries, whether that's fishing or fish processing, seafood processing, or in marine labs, universities. We speak with Professor Benetti's university all the time. So it's this confluence and marriage of so many different parts of, let's say, fish and the ocean, and everyone in our company loves the ocean and loves what we do, and they're passionate about seafood, the fish, the environment. It goes to the core of why we're doing what we're doing.
So
And
go
ahead, Max.
Important to that, because we saw a lot of pictures of nets in the ocean. But what that doesn't represent are some of the things that Omar's pointing to, is everything that's upstream of that from, and these are near shore, onshore, but near operation support services, from feed manufacturing to the health and nutrition part of it, to all the manufacturing of parts and that, and then the downstream, and also the hatcheries that are built onshore, and the employees that are a part of that run those operations, because it all begins onshore, and they take what they grow to fingerling size or larger and move them offshore. And then the downstream folks, like processing and distribution and everything, and these are often, and we think this will be a part of the U.S. growth in this market will be in rural communities and helping rural economic development tool really for that. And then lastly, there's a lot of folks that are in the seafood industry, fishing or otherwise, that are on hard times right now. And you always hear about, coal, for example. Let's retrain these folks into technology or otherwise. Well, there's a lot of problems with that because that's not what they know and what they love. If you're in the seafood industry and you're fishing, well, how about retraining for something that's right in your wheelhouse that makes sense for you? Yeah. You still get to be on the water, around fish, on boats, helping your community, those kinds of things. So there's a great alignment of interests in the folks that are on hard times right now in these fishing communities that can repurpose their skill sets in something that's still in the space that they love.
And to that point, we have numerous former fishermen who work with us either as boat captains or work with the nets or work with the feeding or diving at the farm. So they're very familiar with a marine life, working on boats, on cages with fish. We work with a processing plant that previously focused on sardine and pelagic fish and then didn't have any business for several years. We now are over 60-70% of the capacity of this plant, and it's old infrastructure that can now be repurposed with the employees, with the entire business, working towards a sustainable, consistent business for the long term.
And I think you're correct. And fishermen, commercial fishermen, wild harvest fishermen or watermen, they want to stay a part of that community, a part of the water. And we see that here in the Chesapeake, where there are a lot of watermen who have fallen on hard times, yet that's all they've known. They're third, fourth generation fishermen, and they have actually adopted the oyster aquaculture industry. Because it is something they can learn. There are university systems. We heard about Yoni Zohar earlier, who is working with some folks in the region. So I think that part of community and working with the local fishermen is a big part of the future of aquaculture.
Absolutely. And the social and economic benefits of aquaculture are enormous. And part of our responsibility, a big part of our responsibility is to actually train and educate the new generation to be able to make that shift, because we're shifting from fisheries to aquaculture. Fisheries will always be there, but we need to train this new generation with a broad vision on how to produce fish, because that's what we're going.
Yeah.
So can we do this here? I think is the big question. Sorry, Omar.
No.
We are in the U.S., and that's part of our question of today is offshore aquaculture and coastal and RAS. How do we make this happen in the U.S.? We want to reduce our deficit. We want to grow more food here in the U.S. Can we make this happen?
Good question. I'll ask all of you to look at the label of the clothes you're wearing. It's probably a U.S. brand. We are the customers, and it's our investors, and it's us, but it's probably manufactured abroad. That is exactly what we're doing in aquaculture. So there is a challenge, and again, it's not environmental, and it's not legal, and in my perspective, again, is more economical. Because if we can do this in a profitable manner here, we are unstoppable, because not only we are ahead of the world in technology, but in entrepreneur spirit of the Americans beat no one.
Yeah, I would say there's no reason why we can't do this here. We have the resource, we have the workforce with a very, very strong education and the knowledge. We have the investors, and we have a market here that is hungry for fish. I think really it's a matter of defining the regulatory process and making it more secure for investors to feel comfortable in investing, and spreading awareness and knowledge that, yes, aquaculture can be done well, and it can be done in a way that coexists with the environment and produces a wonderful product for the market.
Yeah, it's on the production side, it's a blank canvas right now, and not only do we have the opportunity to produce more, but I think we can also be a model for the rest of the world as aquaculture expands elsewhere about how it can be done responsibly and still profitably.
And do we have to focus on just those fish that pretty much everybody always talks about? And that's why I'm so glad you were here today, just to not talk about salmon. And I love salmon, and I eat salmon a lot. But when you go to an aquaculture panel, that's pretty much the only species you hear about, or shrimp, or salmon. So there are a lot of species that we can focus on. Dr. Benetti, I think, Could you just mention a few of the key species that are being grown right now?
I do. I have.
In addition to striped bass.
In addition to striped
Well, obviously, striped bass is right there. It's commercially viable. So there are a number of species we're working on, and that's again where NOAA comes into play, because they fund that research that most companies aren't willing to do it. But the list is huge, and from flounder all the way to tuna. And again, we are ahead of the game. We have those technologies, snapper, groupers, and it's all in the pipeline. But again, we have the technology, but we need to make that leap to the economical viability, and that's what it's all about.
I'm less excited about the commoditized fish because they're maturing on their own and doing well, and there's a lot of very sophisticated, great groups that are doing some stuff that are getting better over time. I'm more excited about the work that Dan's doing, and it's the species we don't know about yet that consumers are going to love, that can be raised sustainably in some of the warm water marine fin fish that you can get a fish out of the water in, a third of the time that some of the traditional fish are grown. So there's a sustainability piece to that as well. So.
And what about the cost of some of those fish? Because I know that's a concern. It's come up in a couple questions of aquaculture being seen as just for the wealthy, those folks who are growing salmon. That is a costly fish to purchase at the store. So some of these other species that you're mentioning, is that just for the niche wealthy market, or are there species that we can be growing that are for everyone?
Yeah, that's a great question. You look at tilapia, shrimp that's exploded right now, and in this project we did for the WWF, we talked about the importance of environmental licensing and regulation around expansion of that industry as a check on that, because shrimp used to be a luxury, right? And it was one of those things, but it just exploded to the point now where it's this commoditized product that's accessible to anyone, and unless that's checked, growth is going to continue, and a lot of the damaging parts of that, like mangrove destruction and other things, will continue unless that's checked. There are similar parallel stories of that in other of the proteins as well. But I think there's a lot of markets. There's a niche market, and there always will be one. There's a commoditized market, and there's fish that are accepted in some cultures and not others, and maybe that shifts and changes over time. But whether a fish becomes commoditized or not, salmon wasn't always, and shrimp wasn't always. It became that way. But that's really a function of how the market treats it, and then where it can be grown and how it can be grown. So I think there's an accessible portion and a niche portion.
So given that we have a very thick stack of questions here, that means that there are a lot of questions still remaining about aquaculture. I think we could sit here for a couple days to be able to go through and answer them all. But that means that we need to do a lot more education. Mm-hmm. You're a fabulous baseline for what can be done. We've got some great academic work that's happening, and you're talking about the impediments and how we can overcome those from an investment side. But what public education can we do to help grow this sector? Or what outreach opportunities are there?
I think it comes down to exposure and education in the public school system, in the university system, just demonstrating to the market, to the consumer, to students, to everyone that here's aquaculture, here's how we can have sustainable seafood for the long term. In fact, I work with the local cluster organization, the Maritime Alliance in San Diego, and I've gone to speak to middle school students and high school students in San Diego to tell them what sustainable aquaculture is and to open their eyes to this as a potential career path. Because the more people that know and understand that we can do this well and we can eat more fish and be healthy and help the environment, the better off we'll all be, the better off our ocean will be, and the healthier we'll be.
This is an educated audience, obviously. I think everybody understands the issue, but I think even the public at large, the laymen, everybody's understanding the need to do aquaculture. As a matter of fact, I'm going to make a strong statement here. It's kind of take-home message, but the reality is that, again, the debate wild versus farmed fish is over, and it's not me saying. It's the Washington Post, it's the New York Times that did some investigative reporting, which I have access. I'm not sure if you do, but I do, and I can make public. Is that in Manhattan, They did DNA samples of 8 of the top gourmet shops in New York, in Manhattan, for wild salmon. 7 were farmed, and 1 was an escapee from a farm. So whether we like it or not, and we have to embrace, because it's here to stay. To try to demand a wild fish in the near future is going to be like going to a Smith and Wollensky and order a steak of a wild cow. It's that simple. It's not going to happen.
Max, any last thoughts? We've got to start wrapping up.
Sure.
Thank you.
It's a great question. I mean, I think it needs to be a concerted effort. And I think in the U.S., I think the industry, whether it's wild caught and everyone that surrounds that, or the importers or the growers here, need to understand that a rising tide lifts all boats. And that when you're importing 90% of what you eat, the amount of time it would take to dent any market share of anyone that's operating now, everyone could produce and sell 10, 20 times more than what they are now if it were produced here in the US, right? So I think they just need to get on board. And we talk about that at Stronger America Through Seafood and the importance of that. And I think it deserves a campaign like a Got Milk or Pork the Other White Meat to raise the awareness of farm-raised seafood. At the same time, and I mentioned earlier, being very upfront and transparent about the challenges and problems and facing them and getting better. At the same time, there's always going to be groups that will not like aquaculture no matter what. And I think part of that to combat that is to grow the middle space more and shrink the extremes. Because there's a lot of groups that exist by keeping the issue black versus white, good versus evil, and they fundraise and exist on that. And it's not looking at science, it's not looking at anything behind it. You know, and a lot of them are the same groups that will have the right argument on climate change and look at the data that exists to prove it, and nothing here. I think there's a similarity here in what new aquaculture is with that if we're gonna have a conversation about it, let's talk about it based on science and realities, not what aquaculture was, but what it is and what it can be.
I think that's a great note to end on. There is a 20% that's always going to be pro-aquaculture. There's a 20% that is always going to be negative. You've got that middle group who is kind of swaying back and forth, and it's through panels such as this. It's you asking at the grocery store. It's you asking when you are eating dinner, and being accepting of aquaculture, accepting of farm fish. What you've seen here today is a collaboration, and there are organizations that are collaborating to make this stronger, to make the outreach and to make the change, because we're at a tipping point. So we'll leave that as our take-home message. We sincerely want to thank Capitol Hill Oceans Week for bringing this key topic today to daylight it for you, the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation for having us here, and for all of your great questions. Please keep them coming. We would love to answer any questions that you have, so thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. High five.